Have you ever noticed how something as simple as cleaning can quietly reshape your mood, sharpen your focus, and even influence the decisions you make throughout the day? What if those small, repetitive actions weren't just chores, but subtle signals that guide your brain toward clarity and calm? Welcome to Relaxing Facts Studio, where we explore the hidden patterns behind everyday behaviors. In today's journey, we'll uncover how simple cleaning habits can gently shift your mental state, create a sense of control, and bring a quiet order to both your space and your thoughts. The brush moves back and forth across the floor, creating a steady rhythm of contact and resistance. Each stroke produces a soft scraping sound, a subtle vibration through the hand, and a consistent sensory signal the brain begins to track. You might notice something here. That repeated friction is not ignored. It forms a loop of feedback between touch, motion, and attention, gently anchoring awareness in the present moment. As the surface begins to change, a quiet detail becomes visible. A faint stain fades, a dull area brightens. The contrast between what was and what is now appears almost immediately. The brain responds to this shift. It recognizes progress, even in small increments, and reinforces the behavior through a mild sense of reward. This is where a subtle release of dopamine can occur, not as a burst, but as a steady reinforcement tied to visible improvement. The repetition continues, and something else happens. Mental noise begins to soften. Thoughts that once moved quickly start to slow, replaced by the predictable pattern of motion. It's worth pausing on that idea for a moment. The body leads, and the mind follows, settling into a focused state where each movement feels connected and complete. Beneath all of this, an older pattern is quietly activated. Restoring order to the environment signals control and safety at a basic level. Removing dirt, creating structure, shaping the space, these actions align with deep familiar instincts. Something subtle happens here. The act of cleaning becomes more than a task, turning into a quiet process of regulation, clarity, and steady mental alignment. A small task begins with a simple action. A cloth moving across a surface, an object placed back where it belongs, and the outcome is immediately clear. Cause and effect remain closely linked. You might notice something here. The brain tends to favor environments where actions lead to predictable results, because uncertainty requires more effort to process. In these moments, cleaning offers a quiet form of certainty, where each movement produces a visible and reliable change. As a task reaches completion, even in its smallest form, something subtle happens here. The brain registers closure. A loop has been opened and then resolved, and this completion gently activates internal reward pathways. There is no need for intensity. The response is often calm and steady, reinforcing the behavior in a way that encourages repetition without pressure. The contrast between disorder and order adds another layer to this experience. A cluttered surface holds scattered visual signals, while a clean space presents a single, unified image. It's worth pausing on that idea for a moment. When the brain shifts from processing many competing elements to a simpler structure, the change can feel more significant than it objectively is, creating a quiet sense of satisfaction tied to clarity. These small moments begin to connect. One completed action leads naturally to another, forming a chain of micro-achievements that build momentum over time. Each step feels manageable, each result visible, and the process continues without resistance. Gradually, the brain starts to associate effort with steady progress, reinforcing a loop where simple actions lead to steady motivation and a growing sense of control. Objects spread across a surface begin to compete quietly for attention, each shape, color, and position sending a small signal to the brain. Nothing appears urgent on its own, yet together they create a field of subtle interruptions. You might notice something here. Attention does not settle easily in this environment because it is gently pulled in multiple directions at once, fragmenting focus into smaller and less stable pieces. Even when the eyes move away, something subtle happens here. The brain continues to register these objects in the background, holding a loose awareness of their presence. This quiet tracking process requires energy, even if it goes unnoticed. A stack of papers, an open drawer, items left out of place. Each one adds a small layer of cognitive load that accumulates over time, creating a sense of mental noise that is difficult to fully define. As the number of visible items increases, so does the number of small decisions. Where should this go? Should that be moved? Does this need attention now or later? It's worth pausing on that idea for a moment. These micro-decisions may seem insignificant, yet they draw from the same limited pool of mental energy used for more important choices. Gradually, this leads to a quieter form of fatigue, where even simple decisions begin to feel heavier. In this state, starting a focused task becomes less immediate. The mind hesitates, not from resistance, but from overload. When the environment is simplified, that hesitation often fades. Fewer signals, fewer decisions, and a clearer visual field allow attention to settle more easily, creating a smoother path into sustained and uninterrupted work. A single object rests quietly on a shelf, holding more than its physical form. Over time, it gathers meaning through moments, places, and emotions, becoming linked to experiences that extend beyond its original purpose. You might notice something here. The brain does not store memories in isolation. It often attaches them to physical items, turning ordinary objects into subtle anchors for personal history. As these items accumulate, they begin to reflect different versions of the self. A book from a past interest, clothing from another phase of life, small keepsakes tied to specific moments. Something subtle happens here. Letting go of an object can feel less like removing a possession and more like releasing a piece of identity, even if that identity is no longer active or relevant. When an item is finally set aside or removed, a quiet shift can occur. The space it occupied becomes open, and with it, a small portion of mental attention is released. It's worth pausing on that idea for a moment. Each object that is no longer present reduces the need for background processing, easing a layer of emotional weight that may have gone unnoticed. At the same time, a gentle tension often remains between holding on and letting go. Preserving memories can feel important, yet maintaining too many physical reminders can limit mental clarity. The balance is not always obvious. As space becomes more defined and intentional, the environment begins to support a calmer internal state, where fewer objects compete for attention and memory is carried more lightly, without needing to be constantly seen or managed. The bed is adjusted in small, deliberate movements. Sheets pulled into place, pillows aligned, the surface gradually becoming smooth and defined. In the early hours of the day, the body naturally moves through a rise in alertness, and with it, a subtle increase in internal tension. You might notice something here. A simple, structured action during this period can act as a quiet anchor, giving the mind a clear starting point before other demands begin to appear. As the space shifts from unmade to orderly, something subtle happens here. The environment begins to reflect control and stability, even in a small area. The brain responds to these signals in a quiet way, interpreting order as a form of safety. When the immediate surroundings feel predictable, emotional responses tend to settle, allowing the day to begin with a steadier baseline. The repetition of this routine adds another layer. Each morning follows a similar pattern, and over time, the action becomes familiar and automatic. It's worth pausing on that idea for a moment. Predictable behaviors reduce the need for constant decision-making, which can otherwise introduce a sense of uncertainty. In this consistency, the mind finds a calmer rhythm, where fewer variables need to be processed at once. Completing this small task early creates a subtle shift in perception. One action has already been finished, one result clearly visible. This sense of completion, even at a modest scale, begins to influence what follows. The day unfolds with a slightly stronger sense of direction, where starting the next task feels more accessible, and maintaining momentum becomes a quieter, more natural process. A small action begins almost unnoticed. A cup returned to its place, a surface wiped in a few quiet seconds, a chair gently aligned. These movements feel minor on their own, yet repetition gives them structure. You might notice something here. When an action is simple and easy to repeat, the brain starts to encode it as a pattern, gradually shifting it from effort into something more automatic and familiar. As these micro-actions continue throughout the day, something subtle happens here. They begin to connect, forming a chain of behaviors that require less thought with each repetition. The effort remains low, but the consistency builds quietly in the background, shaping a rhythm that becomes easier to follow over time. There is also a steady accumulation taking place. Small moments of maintenance prevent the need for larger, more demanding efforts later. It's worth pausing on that idea for a moment. A few seconds spent restoring order now can reduce the overall load that would otherwise gather, creating a more balanced and manageable environment without sudden bursts of effort. Each completed action, even a brief one, offers a clear endpoint. The result is visible, the task is finished, and the mind registers completion. This creates a gentle reinforcement loop, where finishing something small encourages the next action to begin without resistance. Over time, These behaviors often attach themselves to existing routines. A surface is wiped after use. Items are returned immediately. Small adjustments follow naturally after daily activities. The pattern becomes integrated rather than separate, allowing consistency to grow without requiring additional effort, and turning simple habits into a steady source of momentum. A cleared surface changes how the mind begins to process the space around it, reducing the number of small, competing signals that would otherwise require attention. Items are either present with purpose or not there at all, and this simplicity removes the need for constant low-level decisions. You might notice something here. Without scattered objects prompting subtle choices, the brain conserves energy, allowing attention to be directed more intentionally. As the environment becomes more structured, something subtle happens here. The mind begins to organize information in a similar way, aligning thoughts with the clarity of the surroundings. Priorities feel easier to identify, not because they have changed, but because fewer distractions are competing for space. A clean setting creates a quiet framework where judgment can operate with less interference. In contrast, cluttered spaces tend to invite quicker, more reactive decisions. The presence of many unrelated items can create a sense of urgency or unfinished tasks, even when none require immediate action. It's worth pausing on that idea for a moment. When the brain is exposed to constant visual noise, it may rely more on impulse rather than careful evaluation, simply to reduce the ongoing load. Cleaning introduces a natural pause in this process. The act itself creates a transition, moving from disorder to order, from scattered signals to a more controlled environment. This shift can serve as a reset point, where previous patterns of thinking soften and a clearer perspective begins to form. Gradually, decisions feel more measured, not rushed, and the mind settles into a steadier, more deliberate rhythm. Shelves are arranged with intention, each item placed in a consistent location, creating a quiet sense of order that extends beyond the visible space. When objects have a defined place, the mind no longer needs to actively track them. You might notice something here. This external organization reduces the load on working memory, allowing the brain to rely on the environment itself as a form of storage. As this pattern repeats, something subtle happens here. The brain begins to form spatial maps, linking objects to specific positions within the environment. Opening a cabinet becomes less about searching and more about recognition, where the hand moves almost automatically toward the expected location. This efficiency is not forced. It develops gradually through consistency, strengthening neural pathways associated with spatial awareness. In contrast, disorganized spaces interrupt this process. When items shift unpredictably, the brain must re-engage in active searching, scanning multiple possibilities and holding temporary information in mind. It's worth pausing on that idea for a moment. Each search requires attention, and over time, these small demands accumulate, quietly draining mental energy that could be used elsewhere. A stable environment supports a different kind of mental rhythm. With fewer disruptions, the brain can focus on retaining and integrating more meaningful information. The absence of constant searching creates space for deeper processing, where memories are formed with greater clarity. Gradually, the environment becomes a partner in cognition, reinforcing consistency and allowing the mind to operate with a calmer, more efficient flow. A room is cleared gradually, surfaces becoming visible again as objects are moved, aligned, or removed from view. The space begins to feel different, not because anything new has been added, but because unnecessary layers have been taken away. You might notice something here. Humans often respond to these moments of simplicity with a quiet sense of mental openness, as if the environment itself has reset its tone. As the surroundings shift into order, something subtle happens here. The brain begins to interpret the change as a signal for new behavior patterns. When visual noise decreases, attention feels less divided, and routines can naturally adjust without resistance. Small actions start to feel more intentional, guided by the clarity of the space rather than the pressure of disorder. This connection between environment and identity becomes more noticeable over time. The way a space is organized often reflects how a person perceives their current state. It's worth pausing on that idea for a moment. When the external environment becomes more structured, internal behavior tends to follow a similar direction, as if the mind is aligning itself with the conditions it observes. Even minor adjustments can carry this effect forward. A cleared surface, an organized drawer, or a simplified corner of a room can act as a subtle starting point. These small resets reduce friction in daily routines, making new habits easier to adopt. Over time, repeated exposure to these calmer environments can influence broader patterns of thinking, allowing gradual but lasting shifts in behavior, focus, and personal structure to emerge naturally. As this journey comes to a close, a quiet moment remains to reflect on what you've just explored. Thank you for spending this time here and allowing these ideas to unfold with you. If you're not yet subscribed, consider joining Relaxing Fact Studio so you don't miss future calming explorations like this. If this episode resonated with you in any way, sharing it on your social platform can help others experience it too. A simple like also makes a real difference in helping this content reach more people. And if you feel like it, leave a comment below. Your thoughts, reflections, or personal perspective matter more than you might think. Your support is what keeps this channel growing, evolving, and continuing this work quietly for you.